Hey, how's it going? This is McCoy Buck. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am the instructor of this course series that you're going to be watching called the Complete Rigging Course. In it, I'm going to walk you through the beginner, intermediate, and advanced stages to rigging. So if you're brand new to Moho and you're brand new to rigging, this is exactly what this was made for. So that it's going to step you through every process so that by the end of it, you're going to have the knowledge of the tools of what it is that you need to use in order to create your own rigs. This course is basically broken down to multiple resources. So each video is a topic. It's around 5 to 7 minutes long, and it's covering one specific thing. So it'll be a really great resource if you need to come back to certain types of tools, how they're used. In this course, this is how I would go about breaking those down. This course is part of many that were paid in the past, and I'm making available on YouTube. This course in particular is my highest rated course, and it's helped thousands of students to be able to learn how to rig inside of Moho. So with that being said, we're going to start with the first lecture, What is a Bone? I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about bones in Moho. As you can see here, we have an awesome character design and animation that was created by Pervin Oskan. So what is a bone? As you can see here, this character is made up of a bunch of different bones. They're basically what you're going to be using in the rigging process, and they're also going to be what you use for your animation. Bones are a pretty important tool because you're going to be able to use them in Moho to make your animation not only easier, but this is one of the ways that you'll be able to move images. So if you take bitmap images, this is one of the ways that you can move your images. So if you are a story illustrator and you want to bring those illustrations to life, bones are definitely the way to do it. So let's go ahead and hit play and let's watch these bones in action. So as you can see here, these bones are playing a vital role in your animation process. These bones are actually being used, and I'll go ahead and I'll show you, to move the character. This character itself was created in Anime Studio with the drawing tools, and the drawing tools that it uses are vectors. And so these vectors are all made up of shapes and points, and these bones are controlling all of those shapes and points. And we'll get into what each of these bones are in later tutorials. But just so you can see here, there's a lot of bones that can do a lot of different things, like head turns. They can manipulate eyelids, different eye shapes, opening and closing. So bones, even though they aren't absolutely necessary for your animation, there's actually other methods that you can use, such as point animation and frame by frame animation, or a combination of all of those. It definitely will help you speed up your workflow. If you're a story illustrator and you want to take your images that you have drawn and import them into Moho and bring them to life, you can do that using bones. One thing about bones is obviously they are only going to be in the program whenever you export or render your animation. So this is what your animation is going to look like once it's complete. You won't have any bones or anything like that on it, and you'll just have this really cool animation. Need help with your rig? I offer one-on-one Moho mentorships. If you'd rather hire it out, I also offer custom Moho rigging services. Links below. So be sure to join me in the next lecture where I will show you how to add bones in Moho, and we'll talk more about those. I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to go over the Add Bone tool. So one of the first things that is really important to know about Moho or Anime Studio is they're going to have dynamic menus. Basically right now, all you see is your layer and your camera and your workspace menu, but you don't see anything related to bones. That's because that's going to take place over here. This is your layers palette. I have this character that was created by Ogusan Gundas, that could also be found in your character library in Moho Pro 12. So if I click here on this character group and I expand this, you can see all of the assets that make up this character, his head, his arms, legs, etc. Now this character is inside of a group. What I can do in order to make bones work is I could actually right click and I can go to convert this group to a bone. Now, if you saw there on the left-hand side, when I clicked that, this tools palette dynamically changed in order to work with bones. But there's another way to do that as well, if you don't already have this inside of a group layer. I'll go ahead and hit back. So let's go ahead and let's take this character and all of his assets. Let's drag it outside of the group folder William. and I'll delete that folder. Now, what I'll do is I'll go to the top layer, I'll go to my new layer button, I'll click that, and I'll go down to bone. So now I just created a bone layer. Let's go ahead and give it the name of William. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take all the assets and I'm going to drag it into this layer, because just like the group layer, the bone layer can also hold multiple assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the head, I'm going to hit shift on my keyboard, and I'm going to click on shoe. So that is the last layer. All of those are now going to be highlighted. Now clicking and holding, I'm going to drag all of those assets into the William folder until you see that that is outlined like so. And I'm going to let go of my mouse. And as you can see there, everything was indented, letting me know that all of these layers are now nested inside of the William bone layer. So now that you have a bone layer created for your character, this could be either an image or for your vectors. You could go over here to the bones tool now, and you're going to select the add bone tool, which is A on your keyboard. To add a bone, you're simply going to click and drag. So to click and drag, you're going to be creating a bone, and another bone that could be created is called a pin bone. So if I could just go ahead and click, that is a pin bone. Now, there's kind of a lot to explain about both these bones, and it's best to show by example. Without getting into the details of rigging, typically when you set up your rig, you're going to be doing something like this. You'll be setting up, and I'll explain these later, a root bone. And then you'll set up your spine. So I'm simply just dragging and clicking. So I'm going to click and drag. So now I'm doing his chest area. Click and drag for his head. And then what I would do is I'd hit Alt on my keyboard. This isn't necessary. This is about add bone tool. But I could hit Alt on my keyboard to select my chest. And then I'd go to my arm. Click and drag. Click and drag. And that is how you're going to use the add bone tool. It's very simple. Now, for the pin bone tool, this is going to be used for moving certain pieces of your asset. The pin bones is only available in Moho Pro 12. So if you don't see this option, it's most likely because you're using Debut or an older version of Anime Studio. So if I click on, say, for example, his elbow, and I wanted to create a pin bone, this could be useful for rotating pieces as well. Once I get into parenting, this will probably make a little bit more sense, but that's just so you know what you can create using the add bone tool. So you can either create a bone, or if you simply just click, you can create a pin bone. That's it for this lecture. In the next lecture, I'm going to cover the bone strength in Moho. I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the bone strength tool. So if we zoom in here to this character that was created by Mike Roberts is actually made up of a bunch of different images that were created in Photoshop. So if I click on the main bone layer right here, I now have the options over here in my bone tools palette to select my bone strength, which is this icon right here, or S on the keyboard. So if I zoom in here now, after selecting that, you can see that there are these semi-transparent circles or ovals around the bones. This is your bone strength. The bone strength lets you adjust how much influence each bone has over the points in a vector layer, but in this case, over the images. So if I zoom out, you can't see it very well, but there are a bunch of different influence or bone strength around all of these image layers. If I expand the image layers, you can see that there's some for the phone, for the hat, for the face. And if I hit play, this is the animation of this character. And this is made possible by bones and how the bone strength is set up. So because these are called target bones and these are only affected on frame 1 and after, I'm going to go ahead and remove those for now. So now what I have the ability to do is adjust my bone strength on frame 0, but also see what it looks like as I'm adjusting it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my bone strength tool, or S on the keyboard. And to adjust your bone strength, you're simply going to click and drag left or right. So if I click the bone and I drag right, it's going to increase that bone strength. If I drag left, it's going to decrease that bone strength. But the best way to see it is with the bone in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my manipulate bones tool, or Z on the keyboard. And I'm going to grab this forearm bone. I'm going to twist this out. And as you can see there, this already has some warping because I was already messing with the bone strength. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this bone, hit S on my keyboard for the bone strength, and then I'm going to come over here, click, and I'm going to drag right. I'm now giving it strength back to this layer or influencing this layer. When I decrease that strength, you can see this bone does absolutely nothing, and this layer goes back to how it was originally created in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and let's bring the bone strength back to bring influence back over that arm. And that looks pretty good right about there, I would say. And then you would go over here to your bone strength here. Same thing, if I click and I drag all the way to the left, I'm gonna lose that strength. So it's gonna go back to its original shape that it was created in Photoshop. But if I bring that strength back, you can see that it's now being influenced once again. You would then go through with this same method throughout the whole body until you get a desirable result. So let's go ahead and show you what it'll look like if I was to play out this animation, add back the target bones with a terrible result for my bone strength. All right, let's go ahead and hit play. So if I zoom in here, I really mess with the bone strength right here, and it's really visible. If I render this layer, you can see that this image is really warped. And so with the bone strength, it's a lot of tweaking. It's a little bit of finesse in there that you got to get right for these images to work. Because you got to remember, this is simply images that Moho is basically moving around and animating. And you are the one that have to set those parameters as to how much influence each of those bones are going to have over your images. And that in a nutshell is bone strength in Moho. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about two different things, the select bone tool and the reparent bone tool. And I'll see you in the next lecture. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the select bone and reparent bone tool. So here we have this character that was created by Mike Basso. If we go here to the bone layer that's labeled 3/4, I'm going to be able to see all of my bones, and I'll also have my bone tool menu. Now the select bone tool is very simple and goes hand in hand when you're reparenting your bones. We'll talk more about parenting your bones in later lectures. So to select your bone, you're going to come to this icon right here, or B on the keyboard. And essentially what the select bone tool does is what it sounds like. It literally just selects the bone. So if I want to select this bone and make some tweaks to it, I can. Or if I wanted to select multiple bones, I can click, hold shift, click, still holding shift, and click the different bones I want. This is useful if I wanted to either shy my bones, which is a option available in the pro version of the software, or if I wanted to go and hide the selected bones, I have that option as well. I'll hit Control-Z on my keyboard to undo. So this option is very helpful if I'm wanting to hide certain bones during the animation if it gets too cluttered. Say this was a character with 4 arms and you have all these overlapping bones and you're trying to animate the one bone. Well, what you could do is you could either shy those bones, or if you have debut, you could hide those bones. Also, the other way that it's going to be used is for reparenting. So if I go over here to my bone tool menu, my reparent tool icon is this one right here, or P on the keyboard. Now this might be a little bit confusing, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but parenting is essentially how you're setting up your rig. So if you look closely, there are arrows that are going from bone to bone to bone. So in this example, I have the foot bone that goes to the parent, which is the calf bone, which goes to the thigh bone, which goes to the crotch bone, which then goes to the main root bone. And you can see the same thing for the torso. Now, the reason why this is important is because your bones are going to be working in a chain-like manner. If you have a missing link in your chain, it's going to break, obviously, the rest of that chain. It's not going to work. It has to link up. So if I go to the chest right here, and let's say this arm was actually parented to the, to the leg, what I can do is I can select with B on the keyboard for the select bone, click on the bone. With my reparent tool, I can then select the leg. So all I have to do is simply go back to my reparent tool, which is P on the keyboard. With the red bone selected, I simply click on the leg. And as you can see here, that arrow is then going to go to the leg. but it's going to break that chain that I have created. So you can see here, as I move the leg now, it is now going to move the arm because the two are directly linked. Vice versa, if I move this arm, everything still seems good to go, but as soon as I move that leg, you see it's no longer connected to the body because that chain has broken. Then if I go back to this arm, and another way that you could select bones already in the reparenting bone, so let's go ahead and let's click that. If I select Alt, as you can see here on the shortcuts up here, if I select Alt, that is another way you can also select your bone. So now that bone is highlighted red. Now to reparent it to the chest, all I have to do is simply select the chest bone. And now that arm will not be falling off or anything when I move the chest bone because they're linked together. You can see the great difference when I move that bone versus when I move this bone. The chain stays together. And that is a quick run through of your select bone and reparent bone tool. Again, this is more going to make sense once we get into parenting of these bones. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about the offset bone tool. I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the offset bone tool. The offset bone tool allows you to create and design your rig as separate elements as you see here. So here I have my left and my right arm very far spaced out, but using the offset bone tool, I can then select the parent and I can drag them back to the main design. Then once I select my select bone tool or the manipulate bone tool, you can see that the view goes back to exploded when using select bone tool, and when using manipulate bone tool, it goes back to what it was using the offset bone tool. That is also going to be the case when I'm on frame 1. To explain why to use offset bones, it would help to explain why they were used in the first place. When you first rig your character and you add bones to your character, you'll have a default bone strength. And this default bone strength is going to influence the artwork around it. So in this case for the arm, you can see that as I move the arm, it's also moving part of the head. And as I move the head, it moves part of the torso and the arm. And as I move the leg, it also moves the leg closest to it. Back in the old versions of Moho and Anime Studio, you had two options that are still available today when it came to rigging with bone strength. If I double click on a bone group layer and I go to bones, I have two options, flexi binding and region binding. Flexi binding is the result you see now. It has a pretty good organic result to where if you move your bone, it does a pretty good job flexing that artwork. And then you also had the option for region binding. Region binding was when the bone strength only influenced the area that it touched. So if I only have my arm moving the bone strength of this design right here, as you can see here, the bone strength is not fully covering the sleeve. Therefore, the sleeve is not being influenced by that bone strength. But if I increase that just slightly more, you can now see that that sleeve is being influenced. But you can see that it's fighting over influence of this head bone right. So right here where there's this overlap, you can now see that I'm not getting desirable results because I have this bone right here that is also influencing that sleeve. So flexi binding gave more flexibility to the overall artwork. Region binding gave the bones influence only over the pieces of artwork or overlapping artwork that the bone strength was touching. So given that these were the two only options for bone strength when it came to rigging, what the designer had to do was take and actually separate the rig so that the design was far enough apart from one another that that bone strength wouldn't influence the other. So now if I take and I move the bones to match the new artwork location. Now, as you can see, when I move the arm, now because the head bone doesn't have influence or that bone strength isn't overlapping the artwork of the arm, that things seem to be working pretty good as far as their ability to bend on their own. And again, this was also before smart bones, so there wasn't options to correct deformations in real time using smart bones. You had to do your best to use the bone strength to best get the shape that you're going for, and then do all your corrections with point animation. So now watch what happens when I combine all of these bones back to the artwork. So here, if I hit B on the keyboard, you can see it explodes, but as soon as I hit Z on the keyboard for the manipulate bones tool, and I then start to manipulate those bones, that influence is not influencing the other. And again, if I switch this over to flexi binding, I have a similar result. So as long as I had the artwork far enough away from each other, that bone strength wouldn't influence the other piece of the artwork. Although I don't use this feature much at all, it would be helpful for characters that are maybe at a profile view or where you have a lot of overlapping design elements, that you want to create those design elements separated and then bring them together using the offset bone tool. That is an example I could see as to how you could use that with current versions of Moho. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the sketch bone tool. So like all the other bones that we create, first, we need to go and create a bone layer. So now that I have a bone layer created, I'm going to go ahead and name this sketch. And right up here in the bone tools palette is the icon for sketchy bones. Go ahead and click that. Now, if you look at the top here, you have the option, just like all these other tools that we've been clicking on, you have additional options. In this case, this is to select your bone length. So with this tool, essentially, you are going to be sketching out your bones. So I'm using a mouse, and I just drew out this line. I'm going to let go. And you can see it created all of these lines of bones. And you're probably wondering, okay, why is that useful? Well, take this cat, for example. If we select the cat, you can see the bones of the tail were probably made by sketch bones. And it looks like they were. So let's go ahead and let's play out the animation, and let's see what this tail is doing. So as you can probably imagine, if you were to take an animation such as this and animate a tail, and once you get into the animation portion, you'll know that with lots of bones, it can sometimes be pretty tedious. So sketch bones was created to make this process a lot simpler. So let's select a keyframe. Right here at frame 7, the cat's tail is pointed up. If I go and I select my sketch bones, which doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, you can see that it's going to bring up all of these different nodes, and you're probably wondering what this is. Well, to explain it shortly to you, this is a really cool feature, and it does something really cool. Watch what happens when I click on this beginning node right here at the tail. As soon as I click on that node and I drag out, you can see that there's a line being created. And this line is actually representing the bones of that tail. Watch what happens when I let go. Did you see that the tail moved? Let's do it in a more drastic way. So I am actually sketching out the trail or the path that I want these bones to go for the tail. Really awesome, powerful feature. You can even look up here, he has a scarf. I could do the same thing for his scarf. So now if I play out the animation, as you can see there, his tail, in a very quick frame, moved down as I had wanted it to. Now if I wanted to go back up like it should have, I'm going to select my sketch bones. I'm going to draw out his tail again. Now the really cool thing about sketch bones is you don't even need to start at the end. Say I only wanted to twist from the middle of his tail down. I can simply click on that sketch bone and just drag where I want the end of his tail to go. So you can imagine what you can do with this tool, whether it's tails, scarves, chains, ropes, whatever it is. This is a really quick way to take those objects, such as a tail or a scarf, that uses principles of animation, such as overlapping action or secondary action, and really make that process easier when you have a whole bunch of bones selected. Not only can this be used for tails, This could also be used for the arm if I wanted to. Be sure and join me in the next lecture when I go over the Transform Bone tool. I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the Transform Bone tool. Now, the Transform Bone tool is a tool that you're going to be using a lot whenever you're going to be rigging. So to use this tool, first I'm going to draw out a bone with my Add Bones tool. And now, to select your Transform Bone tool icon, you're either going to hit T on the keyboard or select this icon right up here. Now, when you have your Transform Bone tool selected, you're going to have two nodes that are going to show up on your bone that you create. The first node at the top is two arrows facing away from each other. This lets me know that when I click and I drag on this bone, I can shrink and expand this bone. Halfway down on this bone, there is a circular arrow. That lets me know that I can rotate the bone. So simply by clicking and dragging left and right, I can now rotate that bone. So the last one is right down here of the bone where the pivot point is. This is the node that lets me know that I can translate my bone or move my bone around. So I'm simply going to click on that node and I'm going to drag around. Now, depending on what version of Anime Studio you're using, you're maybe not going to see these nodes, but the Translate Bone tool still works the same as you would expect. So let's take a look at this rig right here. The bones that I had there previously, you can't see them. They're temporarily hidden because I want to focus on just the arm right here. Let's say while I was rigging this character and I went through and I started testing the arm to see how it moves and see how it bends, I had a bend that I didn't really like. What you can do with the Transform Bone tool is you can, with those nodes that we talked about, you could shrink that bone. And as you can see, as I'm moving this bone around, the parent bone, it is also moving the child bone. So typically, if I was rigging this character and if I wanted these bones to match up with the arm, what I would do is I would right click on the arm layer itself and I would see where that point is. And that point, because this is a stroke, I have 1, 2, 3 points. That middle point is where I have my elbow or where I have the joint. So what I would do with my Transform Bone tool is I'd go back to the bone layer and I'd make a mental note of where that point was. And it was right about there. So that now is where I want it to be. But for this part down here, I now need to translate this bone. And so when I pick this bone and I translate it, I'm going to move it so that those two bones are touching. And then for the end of the bone, for aesthetic purposes, I'm going to drag it out to the edge of the stroke. Now the thing about bones is you actually don't need to have the ends of your bones dragged out to the end of the stroke right here. Technically, if I wanted to, I could just leave it like that. But because when I go through and I animate this bone, I know I'm going to want a little bit more bone to be able to grab. And the reason why I say this is because the rotational point of the bone is right here. Where the bone ends, it doesn't really matter. So that's something that you can keep in mind. So the Transform Bone tool is really useful when you need to make any adjustments to your rig. So when you have already gone through and connected your bones and then you start to test them and they're not working the way that you would hope they would, with your Transform Bone tool, you can select the bone that you want to move and move it with either one of those nodes, whether you want to rotate it, translate it, or shrink or grow that bone. That is what the Transform Bone tool is used for. And that is it for the Transform Bone tool. In the last lecture of this section, we're going to be talking about the Manipulate Bones tool. I'll see you there. Hi, this is McCoy Buck, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the Manipulate Bone tool. The Manipulate Bone tool we talked about a little bit briefly, but this tool is going to be the one that you're probably going to use the most out of all of them. It's Z on your keyboard or this icon right here. Now you see when I click on that Manipulate Bones tool, the bone strength is actually now visible. This shows me that this rig is flexi-bound. Now we haven't gone over flexi binding yet, but we will soon. But the one important thing to know about the Manipulate Bones tool is it's going to be used for your animation, but it's also going to be used for your rigging. Now we're on frame 0 right now. So what can I do with this Manipulate Bones tool on frame 0? One of the best ways that you can use the Manipulate Bones tool is to test out your rig to see if everything is moving and bending properly. So when you go through and you bind your bones to your rig, let's say I bound the arm. So right after binding the arm, I'm not going to move on to the other parts. I'm just going to test the arm and see how it bends, see how it works. Because what I can do with this tool while I have it active and while I'm bending down or something like that, I can hit S on the keyboard to bring up my bone strength. And because this is flexi binding and it's being influenced by the bone strength, I can adjust those parameters to however I would like. Same thing with body bends. If I wanted to manipulate his torso, I would simply select the torso and I could bend his body down. And from there, I can see what I need to do in order to fix this character. Now, because this character is simple and I created it for a simple walk cycle like the one you see there, the bones that I'd be mostly testing is his spine for leaning back, his head bone, which is moving good, everything's in the right place, and his legs. So let's check out his legs. You can see that these have target bones, and we'll talk a little bit about those later on. But these target bones, I can manipulate and I can move around. But as you can see there, I'm not getting very desirable results. And if you aren't familiar with target bones, one of the things that you cannot manipulate on frame 0 are any of the children bones of the target bone. So for example, this foot. So in order to manipulate those bones and test those out to see how those work, I would go to frame 1. Therefore, I now have that ability to manipulate those bones. But the one thing to remember about the Manipulate Bones tool is it basically allows you on frame 0 to test your rig and see how everything is moving. As far as target bones and things like that, we'll talk about that later, flexi binding as well. But just know that Z on the keyboard or Manipulate Bones tool is how you're going to be moving your character around for testing. And that is it for this section for the Bone Tool Palette. Be sure and join me in the next section where we go over the different methods of binding in Moho and Anime Studio. I'll see you there.